The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like a distant memory as Ethan Walker slung his jacket over his shoulder, rubbing his temples. The clock on the precinct wall read 11:42 p.m. Another late night, another shift spent doing routine patrols that barely scratched the itch he once had for real detective work. It had been nearly 2 years since he'd left investigations behind, and yet sometimes, when the streets were empty and the silence stretched too long, the instincts still whispered. Pushing through the station's heavy glass doors, he welcomed the crisp night air, hoping it would clear his mind. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made a man feel either at peace or like something was about to go terribly wrong. Ethan had learned not to ignore that feeling. As he crossed the parking lot toward his car, he heard it, a soft, urgent whine. At first, he ignored it. A stray dog probably sniffing for scraps. But then, just as he unlocked his squad car, he saw it. A dark silhouette, low to the ground, unmoving, watching. A Belgian Malinois, barely more than a pup, its fur streaked with dirt and grime. The dog's ears perked up the moment Ethan turned his head, its deep, intelligent eyes locking onto him. "Go on. Get out of here," Ethan muttered, waving his hand as he pulled open the car door. The dog didn't move. It just sat there, eyes steady, as if it had been waiting for him. He hesitated. There was something off about this. Strays didn't usually stick around like this, not unless someone had been feeding them, and Ethan knew for a fact that no one at the station had been. The dog took a slow step forward, then another before stopping a few feet away. It let out another low, urgent whimper. Not a beg for food. Something else. Something in that sound sent a ripple of unease down Ethan's spine. He sighed, shaking his head. "Not my problem, buddy." Sliding into the car, he shut the door and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the parking lot, casting the dog's shadow long across the asphalt. It stood frozen for a moment, then suddenly darted forward. Before Ethan could react, the dog lunged at the side of his car, paws scraping against the door as it barked, a desperate, urgent sound that cut through the still night like a siren. He cursed under his breath. What the hell was this? Ethan cracked the window. "Get back!" But the dog didn't retreat. Instead, it let out another desperate bark, then turned and ran a few paces away, only to stop and look back at him, waiting, beckoning. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, debating whether to just drive off. But something about that dog, something about the way it wouldn't leave him alone, the way it looked at him like it understood more than it should, made him pause. Then came the clincher. The dog didn't just sit there, it whined, then took another step toward the tree line beyond the parking lot. Then another, and another. It was leading him somewhere. Ethan exhaled sharply. Every instinct screamed at him that this was more than just a lost dog. And Ethan Walker had learned a long time ago to trust his instincts. Cursing under his breath, he shut off the engine, grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, and stepped out into the night. "All right," he muttered, locking the car behind him. "Let's see what's so damn important." The dog moved fast, weaving through the darkness, its lean frame disappearing and reappearing as the flashlight beam cut through the trees. Ethan followed, his boots crunching over fallen leaves, his breath misting in the cold air. "Slow down, will you?" he muttered. But the dog wasn't slowing. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood up. This wasn't just a game of chase. The dog was leading him somewhere, and the urgency in its movements made his stomach knot. Then he saw it. A small structure, barely visible through the overgrown brush, an abandoned storage shed. The wooden planks were warped and rotting, the roof sagging under years of neglect. It looked like it had been forgotten by the world, except for the dog, which stopped at the door and let out another desperate whimper. Ethan stepped forward, pressing a hand against the weathered wood. Something smelled off. Not decay, not exactly, but something stale, like the air inside had been trapped for too long. He tried the handle, locked. The dog barked and clawed at the door, whining. Ethan took a step back and exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." Drawing his flashlight back, he swung hard against the rusted lock. It shattered on impact, the door creaking open an inch from the force. The dog darted inside before Ethan could react. "Hey!" He lunged after it, kicking the door fully open, and then he saw the boy. Huddled in the farthest corner, barely more than a shadow against the cold wooden planks, a child lay curled into himself, unmoving. Ethan's heart slammed into his ribs. The dog whined softly, stepping closer, nudging the child's shoulder with its nose. Ethan dropped to one knee, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. "Hey, kid, you with me?" No response. His flashlight beam skimmed over thin arms wrapped around even thinner knees, messy hair falling over a dirt-streaked face. Ethan's stomach clenched. The boy couldn't be more than 6 years old. The dog whimpered again and licked the child's cheek, as if trying to wake him. And then, finally, a reaction. The boy stirred, a shuddering breath. Then, slowly, so slowly, his eyes fluttered open. Ethan felt his chest tighten as those pale, terrified eyes met his. The boy's lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You found me?" Ethan swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the flashlight. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something much worse. And whatever had happened here, whoever had left this boy in this place, was still out there. The dog had found Ethan for a reason. And now, whether he wanted to or not, Ethan Walker was about to find the truth. The sharp chill of the night seeped into Ethan Walker's bones as he crouched beside the fragile boy, his heartbeat heavy in his chest. The flickering beam of his flashlight cast jagged shadows across the walls of the decrepit shed, making the place feel smaller, suffocating. The boy was barely conscious, his small frame trembling, his breathing uneven. The dog, the same relentless Malinois that had led Ethan here, stood protectively over him, its dark eyes flicking between Ethan and the child, as if daring him to do something, anything to help. Ethan forced himself to focus, pushing away the questions racing through his mind. Who was this boy? Why was he here? How long had he been trapped in this place? None of that mattered right now. First things first. Reaching for his radio, Ethan pressed the button, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Dispatch, this is Officer Walker. I need an ambulance at my location, immediate response. I've got a child, male, approximately 6 years old, severely dehydrated, unresponsive but breathing." The static crackled before a voice responded. "Copy that, Walker. Sending medical. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Ethan turned his attention back to the boy. His skin was ice cold, his cheeks sunken from dehydration, but it was the fear in his eyes that unsettled Ethan the most. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a kid who had been through something terrible. He reached out carefully, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, buddy. My name's Ethan. You're safe now, okay? Can you tell me your name?" The boy flinched at first, but didn't pull away completely. His lips barely moved as he whispered something so faint Ethan almost didn't catch it. "Liam." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. A name. That was a start. "Okay, Liam," he said softly. "You're going to be all right. Help is on the way. Just hang in there, all right?" The dog, Liam's dog, obviously, whined, pressing closer to the boy's frail body, its warmth the only thing keeping him from slipping further into shock. Ethan wasn't an emotional guy, but there was something about the silent loyalty in that dog's eyes that hit him hard. This dog hadn't just found Liam. It had been protecting him, and if the dog was here, then that meant Ethan's gut twisted. Liam hadn't been alone. Someone had put him here. Someone had abandoned him in this place. And whoever had done this wasn't expecting him to be found. The distant wail of sirens echoed through the night. Ethan didn't move from Liam's side as the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness, the ambulance pulling up along the overgrown dirt path leading to the shed. The paramedics moved fast, wrapping Liam in a thermal blanket, assessing his vitals. Ethan stepped back, giving them space, but his mind was already working, already piecing together the puzzle. One of the paramedics frowned as she checked Liam's arms. No visible injuries, but he's weak. Malnourished. How long was he out here? Ethan clenched his jaw. I don't know yet, but I'm gonna find out. The Malinois growled low as the paramedics lifted Liam onto the stretcher, his small fingers weakly gripping the dog's fur. He didn't want to let go. Ethan crouched beside him, lowering his voice. Liam, buddy, your dog's coming too. I promise that seemed to be enough. Liam's fingers relaxed, his eyelids fluttering closed as exhaustion finally pulled him under. As the ambulance doors shut and the vehicle rumbled away, Ethan turned back to the shed. His flashlight beam scanned the interior, looking for anything, any clue, that might explain how a 6-year-old ended up alone in a place like this. The first thing he noticed was the dust, undisturbed dust, except for one area. The corner where Liam had been huddled was worn, not just from tonight, but from repeated movement. Ethan ran his hand over the floorboards, his fingers brushing something rough. His breath caught as he lifted a small, discarded stuffed animal, a bear, old and frayed at the seams, not just a few days. Liam had been here for a while. Someone had left him here, intentionally. And that meant there was more to this than just a missing child. This was something much worse. Ethan stayed with Liam at the hospital. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't protocol. But something about this case had latched onto him, refusing to let go. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the hospital room. The air smelled of antiseptic, of freshly changed sheets, of something sterile and cold. Yet, amidst the quiet hum of machinery, there was warmth. Warmth curled up in the form of a Belgian Malinois, its head resting beside a small, frail hand gripping its fur. Liam. He was awake now, but barely there. His eyes, though open, held the dull weight of exhaustion, of a mind that had seen too much for a child his age. Ethan Walker sat at the edge of the room, his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't left since last night. Maybe he should have. Maybe it wasn't his job to stay, but something about the kid, about the dog that wouldn't leave his side, kept him rooted to the chair. Liam's fingers twitched slightly in the dog's fur, his lips pressing together. Then, almost as if he were gathering the courage to speak, he turned his tired eyes toward Ethan. "Did you find my mommy yet?" The question hit like a punch to the ribs. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had no easy answer for that. "Not yet, buddy, but I'm working on it." Liam's small shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't cry. That was what worried Ethan the most. A kid his age, scared, lost, alone, should have been crying, should have been clinging to him, begging to go home. But Liam wasn't, because he already knew something. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Liam, do you remember what happened before you were in the shed?" Liam's lips parted, his brow furrowing like he wanted to answer, but something was stopping him. The dog, sensing his hesitation, gave a soft whimper and nuzzled against Liam's side. The boy's hand immediately went to the dog's fur, gripping tighter. Then, in a whisper so faint Ethan had to strain to hear, "She told me to stay hidden." Ethan's breath caught. "Who did?" Liam's fingers twitched again. His body shrank inward, shoulders curling up as if he were bracing for something bad. His voice, barely above a breath, "Aunt Claire." There it was. The name again. The same one he'd murmured the night before. The same person who had apparently told Liam to stay in the shed. But something didn't add up. Why would a woman who was supposed to be protecting Liam leave him alone in the middle of nowhere? And where was Sarah Lane? Ethan leaned in slightly. Liam, did Aunt Claire tell you where your mom went? Liam's face twisted slightly. Then, finally, she said Mommy had to go away, that I had to wait. She said she'd come back. Ethan's stomach turned to lead. Sarah Lane hadn't left Liam there of her own free will. Someone had wanted him out of the way. Someone had lied to him. Ethan's car roared to life as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot, the early morning fog still thick against the windshield. The dog, Liam's dog, now officially nicknamed Shadow, sat in the passenger seat. Ears perked, eyes locked on the road ahead as if it, too, knew they were heading into something dangerous. Ethan didn't know how or why, but Shadow had led him to Liam once. Maybe it could lead him to the truth again. Aunt Claire. The name wasn't in any of Sarah Lane's emergency contacts. No records of a relative, no co-workers by that name. But after digging through Liam's medical records, Ethan found something. A contact listed as Claire Matthews, and she had an address. The house sat on the outskirts of town, an old, weather-worn property surrounded by tall trees that made it almost impossible to see from the main road. Ethan pulled up, his fingers instinctively grazing his holster as he stepped out. Something about this place felt wrong. Shadow jumped out beside him, its body tensed, nose twitching. It sensed something. Ethan stepped up to the porch, knocked once, twice, nothing. Then, movement. A shadow passing behind the window. Ethan's entire body locked into focus. "Claire Matthews," he called, his voice sharp, authoritative. "This is Officer Walker. Open the door." Silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, early 40s, blonde hair pulled into a loose bun. Her expression was carefully neutral. Too neutral. "Officer?" she asked, tilting her head. "Is something wrong?" Ethan studied her. He'd been in this job long enough to recognize a liar when he saw one. He kept his tone calm. "I'm here about Liam." Something flickered across her face. It was fast, too fast, but he caught it. A fraction of hesitation, a single glance toward the stairs behind her. "He's okay," Ethan said, watching her reaction carefully. "But I need to know what happened, why he was left in that shed." Claire let out a breath, folding her arms. "I was trying to protect him." Ethan raised a brow. "From who?" Another hesitation. Then softly, too softly. "His mother." Ethan didn't believe her. Everything in Claire's posture, her tone, it was all wrong. And the way Shadow had begun growling low in its throat, ears flattened, the dog didn't believe her either. Ethan kept his expression neutral. "You're saying Sarah Lane is dangerous?" Claire pressed her lips together. "She wasn't well. She kept talking about someone following her, about needing to run. She was paranoid. I was just trying to keep Liam safe." It almost sounded convincing. Except, why wouldn't Sarah have reported that? Why wouldn't she have gone to the police if she thought someone was after her? And why would Claire's first instinct be to hide Liam in an abandoned shed? None of it made sense. "Where is she now?" Ethan asked. Claire's eyes flicked to the window, that hesitation again. And Ethan knew she was hiding something. Before he could press further, Shadow suddenly lunged forward, barking, but not at Claire, at the basement door. The sound that came next made Ethan's blood turn to ice, a faint muffled pounding, and then a voice, weak, desperate. "Help me!" Ethan's gun was out before Claire could react. "Step back!" he ordered, his voice sharp. Claire paled, taking a hesitant step away from the basement door. I can explain. Don't." Ethan's hand was already on the door handle, yanking it open. The smell hit first. Damp, stale air, the scent of someone trapped in a place for too long. And there, huddled at the bottom of the stairs, weak, barely able to lift her head, Sarah Lane, Liam's mother, alive. The moment Sarah's eyes met Ethan's, she let out a choked sob. "Liam," she whispered, "where's my baby?" Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "He's safe." I promise. Tears slipped down her cheeks, relief, exhaustion, but also fear. "She took him," Sarah's voice cracked. She told me she'd protect him, but she was working with them. She locked me down here so I wouldn't stop them." Ethan's grip tightened around his gun. Them. There was more to this, and Claire Matthews wasn't working alone. Sarah gasped in another breath, gripping his sleeve. "They're coming for him," she whispered. "They're not done yet." And just like that, Ethan knew. This was far from over. Sarah Lane sat on the hospital bed, her fingers trembling as she clutched the warm cup of tea the nurse had handed her. The fluorescent lights above cast a sterile glow over the room, but she still looked like she was somewhere else, somewhere dark, trapped in the memories of the past weeks. Ethan Walker stood near the doorway, his arms crossed as he observed her. She looked physically intact, but he could tell the real wounds weren't the ones that could be treated with bandages. Across the room, Liam was sleeping, curled up in the hospital bed next to Shadow, his tiny hands tangled in the dog's fur, as if afraid that letting go would make everything disappear. The boy had refused to sleep alone, and the hospital had made an exception for Shadow to stay with him. Sarah's gaze flickered toward her son, softening for the briefest moment before she turned back to Ethan. Her eyes were sharp now, burning with something raw. "You have to protect him," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but firm with urgency. "They're not done." Ethan already knew that. He'd felt it the moment he had found her locked in that basement, the moment Claire Matthews had given herself away with the hesitation in her voice. There were more people involved in this, people who had gone to great lengths to silence Sarah, and if they had failed once, they wouldn't fail again. "Start from the beginning," Ethan said. "Tell me everything." Sarah inhaled shakily, staring down at her hands before beginning. "It started about 2 months ago," she said. "I didn't think much of it at first, just small things. A car parked outside my house late at night, a wrong number calling multiple times. I felt like I was being watched, but I kept telling myself it was paranoia." Ethan knew that feeling all too well. "Then one night," she continued, "Liam and I came home and the door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it before we left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did you call the police?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "I did. They sent an officer who took a quick look around and said there were no signs of forced entry. That I probably forgot to lock it." She shook her head. "But I knew I didn't." Ethan felt the familiar frustration crawl under his skin. If someone had taken her concerns seriously then, maybe none of this would have happened. "I thought about moving," Sarah admitted, "but I didn't have anywhere to go. I told Claire about it and she offered to help. She said she knew a place we could stay, somewhere safe. I was so desperate I trusted her." Ethan could hear the self-loathing in her voice. "But the moment I walked into that house, I knew something was wrong." Sarah clenched her hands into fists. "Claire wasn't trying to protect us. She was keeping us in one place. I realized it too late." Ethan kept his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing. "Did you recognize any of the people she was working with?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "One man. He came to the house a few times. Claire called him Mason." Ethan stiffened. Mason Carter. A name he recognized. A name that had come up in investigations before, but had never stuck, because Mason was careful. Too careful. He had no official record, no convictions. He was a ghost, but everyone in law enforcement knew his name. He was connected, not to one organization, but to many. Human trafficking, drug smuggling, underground operations. And now, apparently, he had an interest in Sarah Lane and her son. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Did he ever say what he wanted?" Sarah shook her head. "Number." But I knew I was in trouble. The night before they locked me in that basement, I overheard Claire talking to him. She said Liam and I were taken care of and that the handoff was still happening. A chill crawled up Ethan's spine. The handoff. This hadn't just been about Sarah. It had been about Liam. Ethan forced his voice to remain steady. Sarah, why would they want your son? Sarah's fingers tightened around the cup, her knuckles white. She exhaled shakily before answering. Because Liam. He's not my only son. Ethan froze. Sarah didn't look at him. Instead, she stared at the hospital bed where Liam was sleeping peacefully, her face a mix of pain, guilt, and something else, something deeper. I gave birth to twins, she whispered. Liam has a brother. Ethan's pulse slammed through his veins. Where is he? Sarah's breath caught, and finally she looked at him. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. He was taken from me 6 years ago. Ethan's head spun. You're saying Liam's twin is missing? Sarah swallowed hard. Not missing. Taken. A cold realization sank into Ethan's bones. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that when children disappeared like that, they didn't always make it back. But this was different. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was something bigger, something planned, something connected to Claire, to Mason Carter, and to whatever the hell was happening now. Ethan's fists clenched. Sarah, if Mason Carter was involved 6 years ago, why come after Liam now? Sarah's eyes filled with pain. Because I started looking for his brother again, she whispered. And I got too close. Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. Mason Carter didn't lose ends. And if he thought Sarah had gotten close to something, if she had started asking the wrong questions, then taking her and Liam off the board would have been his first move. But now he had failed. Sarah had survived. Liam was alive, and Mason Carter wasn't going to let that go unanswered. Ethan stood, his entire body coiled with purpose. We're not waiting for them to make their next move. Sarah's head snapped up. What do you mean? Ethan looked her dead in the eye. I mean, we go after them first. Within hours, Ethan had assembled a task force. FBI agents, local officers, anyone who was willing to take on Mason Carter and his network. Sarah's testimony gave them the first real lead they had in years. A name, a location, a reason to strike before Mason had a chance to disappear again. By nightfall, the operation was set. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that crawled under your skin, made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Ethan Walker gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight, his focus razor-sharp. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Somewhere inside, Mason Carter was waiting. Somewhere inside, the truth about Liam's twin was buried under layers of secrets. Tonight, that ends. Ethan wasn't alone. Behind him, a convoy of FBI agents, SWAT officers, and local police units were gearing up, guns loaded, Kevlar secured, minds set. Sarah Lane sat in the back seat, her hands trembling despite the warmth of Shadow's fur beneath them. The Belgian Malinois had refused to leave her side, sensing her fear, her pain, her unyielding determination. Are you sure about this? Ethan asked, looking at her through the rearview mirror. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes dark with resolve. They took my son, she whispered. I'm not running anymore. Ethan gave a small nod. Good. They were done running. Tonight, they fight. The approach was swift, silent, methodical. Ethan and his team moved like shadows, cutting through the night, keeping close to the warehouse walls. His earpiece crackled with the voice of Agent Lawson, the FBI lead on the operation. All units in position. No sign of movement. We breach on your command. Ethan exhaled, steadying his breathing. He looked at Sarah. Stay behind me, no matter what happens. She nodded, gripping Shadow's collar. Ethan turned back to the door. His fingers tightened around his weapon. Time to end this. Breach! The door exploded inward. Glass shattered. Shouts erupted as officers swarmed in, guns drawn. Ethan moved fast, clearing the first room, empty. A sense of unease crept into his chest. Too quiet. Too easy. Then, Walker, second floor, movement! Ethan bolted up the stairs, heart pounding. He reached the upper landing just in time to see a dark figure slipping through a door at the far end of the hall. Mason. Stop! Ethan tore after him, the sound of his boots pounding against the metal floor. Mason burst through another door, the warehouse's rooftop access. Ethan followed, gun raised, breath sharp. Mason was already waiting, a smirk twisted on his lips. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Ethan didn't waste time. Where is he? Mason's smirk widened. You'll never find him. Ethan took a slow step forward, steady, calculated. Mason's hand twitched toward his jacket. Ethan fired. The bullet grazed Mason's arm, making him curse as he stumbled back. Ethan lunged, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the railing. Where is he? Mason's eyes darkened, and then he laughed. You're too late. Ethan's blood ran cold. The warehouse wasn't the real target. The real target was Liam. Ethan's radio crackled violently. Walker, hospital under attack. Multiple armed men, looking for the boy. Liam, Sarah. Ethan threw Mason aside, sprinting toward the exit. Mason's voice followed him into the night. You can't stop it. He was never yours to save. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already at the hospital, at Liam, at the child who had already been through too much. He wasn't losing him. Not now, not ever. Ethan arrived just in time. The hospital parking lot was a war zone. Gunfire cracked through the air. Shadow leaped out of the car before it even stopped, snarling as he charged toward the fight. Sarah was crouched behind a police car, gripping Liam in her arms. Her eyes met Ethan's. Relief. Fear. And then, behind her, a man raised his gun. Ethan's world slowed. He moved without thinking. One shot. One body dropped. Sarah screamed. Liam clung to her, sobbing. Ethan ran to them, dropping to his knees. You're okay. You're okay. Sarah was shaking, but alive. Liam, his small fingers digging into Ethan's shirt, was breathing. Shadow stood guard, his fur bristling, ready to attack again if needed. Ethan tightened his hold around the boy. It's over, he whispered. And for the first time, he believed it. The sun was rising by the time the dust settled. Mason Carter was in custody, his operation dismantled. Liam's twin, a boy named Lucas, was found in a safe house just hours later. For the first time in 6 years, Sarah Lane held both of her sons in her arms. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt like he had truly saved someone. The world outside the hospital room was awake with movement. Doctors making rounds, nurses exchanging reports, distant conversations murmuring through the hallways. But inside this small room, there was only silence, a peaceful kind, the kind that comes after surviving something that should have broken you. Ethan Walker sat in the corner chair, watching the two boys curled up on the hospital bed. Brothers, reunited after 6 years apart. Liam, small and fragile but safe, tucked beneath the arm of Lucas, his twin, the boy they had spent so long searching for. Sarah Lane sat beside them, her fingers lightly brushing through Liam's hair as if she still couldn't believe this was real. Ethan didn't blame her. So much had happened in the last 48 hours. The raid at the warehouse, Mason Carter's arrest, the shootout at the hospital, all of it leading to this moment. A mother reunited with both her children. A family given a second chance. Shadow lay stretched across the floor near the bed, his head resting on his paws, his body still alert despite the calm. His eyes flicked toward Ethan every now and then, as if making sure he was still there, still watching over them. Ethan shifted in his chair, exhaling slowly. His body ached from exhaustion, but his mind was restless. This was supposed to be the part where he walked away. Case closed. Justice served. Family safe. But why did the thought of leaving make his chest feel heavier than it should? Lucas stirred first. His eyes fluttered open, scanning the room as if expecting it to disappear, as if this was all some kind of dream he might wake up from at any moment. Then his gaze landed on Liam, still sleeping beside him. Lucas froze. Ethan watched as the boy's fingers twitched, hesitantly reaching out. Slow, cautious, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to touch the brother he had never gotten the chance to grow up with. And then Liam shifted, murmuring something in his sleep, instinctively pressing closer to Lucas like they had never been apart. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath. His hand finally landed on Liam's arm, gripping onto him like a lifeline. Sarah's breath hitched beside them. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't move, didn't speak. Ethan just sat there, watching. There was nothing to say. Some things, some moments, didn't need words. A few hours later, the boys were moved to a private recovery suite, allowing them more space. Sarah was hesitant to let them out of her sight, and Ethan didn't blame her. She hadn't left the hospital in days. Neither had he. "You know you don't have to stay," Sarah said softly as she sipped the coffee he had brought her. They sat outside the hospital room in a quiet hallway, Shadow lying at Ethan's feet. "I know," Ethan said simply. Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "But you're going to anyway." Ethan shrugged. "You're not the only one having a hard time letting go." Sarah exhaled, rubbing her temples. "They're safe now. I know that, She trailed off. Ethan understood. Mason Carter was in custody, but his influence wasn't gone. The people he worked with, the network that had taken Lucas in the first place, they weren't just going to disappear overnight. Sarah was free. But for how long? She turned to Ethan, her voice quieter. "What if it's not over?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached down, running a hand over Shadow's fur. The dog had been tense all day, his instincts sharper than ever. Even he knew this wasn't over. Ethan met Sarah's gaze. "Then we don't let our guard down." She nodded, looking back toward the room where her sons were. "How do I explain this to them?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "You tell them the truth. You tell them they're safe because you fought for them, because you'll always fight for them." Sarah swallowed hard. "And if they come for us again?" Ethan's grip on his coffee cup tightened. "Then they'll have to go through me first." By the time Sarah and the boys were cleared to leave the hospital, a full security detail had been arranged. Sarah protested at first, but Ethan had seen too many families like hers disappear because they thought the danger had passed. Not this time. "Where do we go now?" Liam asked, his small fingers gripping Ethan's sleeve as they stepped outside the hospital doors. Ethan looked down at him, at the wide, innocent eyes that had already seen too much. Where could they go? Where would they be safe? Sarah had no home to return to. She had spent years running, and even now, that fear was still in her eyes. The answer came out before Ethan even had time to think about it. "You'll come with me," he said. Sarah blinked, startled. "What?" Ethan cleared his throat, glancing away. "At least for a while, until we figure out the next move." Sarah hesitated. "Ethan, we can't just—" "Do you trust me?" he asked. Sarah fell silent. Then she nodded. "Yes." And just like that, the decision was made. Ethan's house had never been a home. It was a place to sleep, to shower, to escape from the world. But that changed the second he walked through the front door with a mother, 2 boys, and a loyal Malinois at his side. It was messy at first. Liam and Lucas were cautious, trying to understand what it meant to have each other again, to have a family. Sarah struggled to adjust, constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. And Ethan? Ethan Walker had spent years believing he was meant to be alone. The job had been his only purpose, his reason for getting up in the morning, his anchor in a world that had long since lost meaning. But now, as he stood in the doorway of his once empty home, watching two boys chase a dog through his backyard, he realized something had changed. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family now. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't want to run from it. It had been 3 months since the night Mason Carter's network fell apart. 3 months since Lucas had been rescued, since Sarah had reunited with her sons, since Ethan had brought them here, to his home, to his life. The transition hadn't been easy. Sarah still struggled to sleep through the night. She jumped at loud noises, flinched at unexpected touches, kept the curtains closed even during the day. Liam and Lucas, despite their newfound bond, were still learning how to be brothers, learning how to exist in each other's space after years of separation. And Ethan? Ethan was learning how to be something more than just a cop. He wasn't their father, he knew that. But he was something, a protector, a guardian, someone who wouldn't walk away. "Lucas, stop cheating!" Liam's voice rang out across the backyard, his laughter mixing with the rustling of leaves. Shadow darted between the boys, barking excitedly as they chased each other in circles. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, watching them with quiet amusement. Sarah stepped outside, handing him a cup of coffee. "You're smiling," she noted. Ethan huffed. "No, I'm not," Sarah smirked. "Yeah, you are." Ethan took a sip of coffee, refusing to engage in the conversation. But she wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. Sarah's voice softened. "They love it here, you know." Ethan glanced at her. "And you?" Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her own mug. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan." Ethan didn't look away. "You would have survived." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Maybe, but surviving isn't the same as living." That hit deeper than he expected. Because she was right. For so long, he had only been surviving too. But now he was finally living. Morning started with the sound of little feet padding down the hallway, Liam and Lucas competing to see who could wake up first. Breakfasts were chaotic. Spilled juice, misplaced shoes, Shadow stealing toast off the table when no one was looking. Afternoons were filled with schoolwork, with Ethan teaching Lucas how to throw a perfect spiral football pass, with Sarah sitting on the porch laughing for the first time in years. And nights? Nights were the hardest. That was when the past crept in. When the boys woke up from nightmares, whispering fears into the darkness. When Sarah would sit by the window staring out at nothing, her mind replaying things she refused to speak aloud. When Ethan found himself watching over all of them, making sure they were still safe, still here. It wasn't easy, but it was the closest thing to happiness Ethan had ever known. Ethan had almost convinced himself they had left the worst behind. But then the letter arrived. A plain white envelope, no return address. Left in his mailbox in the middle of the night. His name was scrawled across the front. Just 3 words inside. "You can't hide." Ethan felt his heartbeat slow. His fingers curled around the paper, his grip tightening as his mind worked through every possibility. Mason Carter was behind bars, but his connections weren't. Sarah found him on the porch minutes later, Shadow at her side, concern written all over her face. "Ethan?" He folded the note in half, stuffing it into his pocket. "It's nothing." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "That's a lie." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Just a reminder that this isn't over." Sarah frowned. "Do we need to leave?" Ethan looked at her, then at the boys inside the house, laughing, playing, safe, and he shook his head. No. He wasn't running anymore. That night, Ethan reinforced every lock, rechecked the security cameras, made sure every possible entry point was secure. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, watching him with a look of quiet determination. "You think they'll come for us?" she asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Sarah nodded, as if she had already made peace with that. "Then we'll be ready." Ethan wasn't sure when the shift had happened, when Sarah had stopped being afraid and started standing her ground, but it made him respect her even more. She wasn't running anymore either. Neither of them were. That weekend, Ethan took Liam and Lucas to the park for the first time. It seemed like such a small thing. But for them, for two boys who had spent most of their young lives in hiding, separated, living in fear, it was everything. Lucas climbed the jungle gym, laughing loudly, freely. Liam chased after Shadow in the grass, his tiny arms outstretched, his face glowing with joy. Sarah sat on the bench beside Ethan, watching with tear-filled eyes. Ethan turned to her. "They're okay." Sarah nodded, her voice thick. "For the first time in a long time. So am I." Ethan watched the boys play, the warmth of the sun soaking into his skin, into his bones. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know when the next threat would come. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just protecting them anymore. They were his family now. And he would fight for them. Always. At its core, this story is not just about the mystery of a missing child or the thrilling chase for justice. It is a story about survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that form in the face of darkness. Liam and Lucas, two brothers separated by a cruel fate, teach us that even after years apart, love remains. Family is not just about blood. It is about those who refuse to let go, who fight for you, even when the world seems against you. Sarah, a mother who risked everything to protect her sons, reminds us of the unwavering strength of a parent's love, proving that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it win. Ethan, a man who once lived in solitude, learns that family is not something you are given. It is something you choose. Through his journey, we see that healing is possible, that even the most guarded hearts can open when love, trust, and purpose take root. Shadow, the ever-loyal dog, symbolizes something even greater: faith, devotion, and the unspoken promise to stand by the ones you love, no matter what. This story is about second chances, for a mother, for her children, and for a man who never expected to find a home in the people he swore to protect. In the end, it teaches us that family is not just about where you come from, but about the people who choose to stand by your side, fight for you, and love you through every battle. Because true family never leaves. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.